Welcome back to the Collin Cadmus Podcast. Today I'm joined by Sean Evers. Sean is from the United Kingdom, where he played professional football for 9 years prior to shifting his career into sales, where he started in operations and worked his way up to holding 4 VP of sales positions, including his most recent and current position as VP of sales at Pipedrive. One of the most challenging aspects of selling B2B SaaS today is the abundance of competition. It seems like whatever we sell, every 6 to 9 months, we have 2 to 3 new competitors, and it gets difficult to find ways to stand out and differentiate. Sean is a go-to-market expert who spent the last 2 years cracking the code on positioning and selling Pipedrive against competitors like Salesforce and HubSpot, which is no easy feat. In this episode, we'll find out exactly how he approached it, what worked, what didn't, and get his thoughts on the quickly changing landscape of B2B sales. Before we get started, if you're watching on YouTube, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave us a comment if you have questions. If you're joining us from Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please drop us a review and let us know what you think of the episode. This stuff really helps to grow the audience. Without further ado, let's dive in and get his thoughts. Sean, thanks for joining me and welcome to the show.
Colin, pleasure to be here and looking forward to speaking to you over the next hour about all things sales and generally help people in the community get hopefully some practical advice of the things that I've learned and the mistakes that I've done along the way. So super excited to be here.
Likewise. Well, you're definitely the first professional football player turned salesperson I've ever spoken to. And for the people in the States, we're talking UK football, the real football, right? Soccer as we call it. But that's super cool. I don't know if there's anything you want to throw in there before we jump into this real quick. I'm just curious. How'd you go from that to sales? What was the bridge there? I mean, was it sort of you were just, getting older and wanted to find something that, you could sustain longer term? How did that little bridge happen there?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So from being 16, I got into professional football, got offered a kind of apprenticeship that we called it at the time. And quite quickly, Colin, I got into the first team at a football club called Luton Town, which actually were in the Premier League. Actually, last year they got relegated last year. But I played for about 8 years professionally. And my career was sort of up and down. I was sometimes in the team, sometimes out of the team. But as my wife would say, there come a point in time where I had to go and get a proper job. And one of my friends was actually in real estate, what you call real estate. We call it a estate agency in the UK. But he was a regional manager for one of the real estate branches. And he said, hey, why don't you come and try and be a sales negotiator? So an individual contributor that was really matching people looking to find homes to their kind of ideal home or their dream home. So I did that. And that's really how I fell into sales. I went into an office environment, got given a phone, got given a pen and paper, said qualify these applicants and match them to some properties. And then just loved sales, never came out of it. And then obviously moved my way into kind of management positions throughout my career.
Love it. That's so awesome. And it always seems like the people who stumble their way into sales, which by the way, I think is all of us. I don't know how many people actually plan. I know they have colleges now where the people major in sales and stuff. I never knew about that when I was getting into school, but it seems like it's always sort of someone's friend who notices that you just would probably be good at it, right? They're like, hey, I think you could do this too. And it was my brother-in-law who did it to me. I was in between jobs. I got out of retail and I wanted to figure out what to do. And he's like, you're a salesperson. Like, you just don't know it yet, And so I feel like it's that type of industry where we just suck each other in. We sort of identify those traits in our friends and our circle, and you just hear it. Like, it's always sort of common that someone sort of said you should try this. So I love that. Do you think that a lot of sort of the discipline that you carried from sports helped you early in your sales career?
I didn't think it at the time, but when I now go back and reflect on it, 100%. So I love new business. Like, there's a whole world of account management and growing accounts and expanding, but I really love new business. And I think that's that competitive side that I had in football, which was like, you're competing against something you want to win and that kind of piece. And then the whole kind of team environment, as you know, football and soccer, there's 11 players on the pitch. You're one of 11, you're part of a team. You've got a role to play in kind of a bigger part of the kind of machine. And I think that's also really helped me understand about cross-functional collaboration, marketing, sales, support, customer success. So when I look back, definitely there's loads of stuff that's helped me on that.
Yeah, I've always had good luck hiring former athletes, former military, anyone who's been submerged in sort of a team, but also competitive environment where discipline is just rigorously necessary, they seem to do very well in sales. So it doesn't surprise me at all that's
Yeah,
been your
totally
experience.
makes sense. And again, very similar to kind of your experience. You know, the good salespeople are generally disciplined. They're disciplined with the time. They're organized, but they've also
Yeah.
got that kind of internal motivation and drive, which you obviously find, as you
Yeah.
said, with military or sports people. That tends to be, you know, sort of ingrained in them from being probably very little.
Bingo. And they're sort of used to playing on a team, but I think also being competitive against one another. Because that's how the military is. You're on a unit or whatever they call it, but you also want to get moved up before the next guy next to you. And it's sort of the same on a team. Like you want to score more points, but there's still like you need to work as a team. So I think sales is just, it's so similar. So yeah, that's cool.
Totally. Like when again, relating it a little bit to kind of football and soccer, you know, there was only really one position that I played in, and there might be 4 or 5 of us trying every week to try and get that one position.
What did you play?
To start in the team? I played midfield, which was kind of the center of the pitch. But yeah, no, it was completely to your point. You know, you've got that whole team aspect to it, but you've also got that internal competition that you have with your teammates and colleagues as well.
Like I want our team to beat the other teams, but I want to beat everyone on our team. That's sort of the mindset, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's jump in. I want to start by, normally I dive into just some high level questions, but I want to get a sense of what's going on at Pipedrive first. So I have a bit of a foundation. So can you give me a sense here of sort of how big the team was when you came in versus where it's at today and what has happened along there? I mean, have you guys grown the team? Have you narrowed it down and made it more efficient? Where did it start and what direction have you taken it in over the last couple of years that you've been there?
Sure. So Pipedrive is 14 years old. It was founded in Estonia, Collin. And the kind of concept was that the 5 founders that created Pipedrive were salespeople. They actually knocked on doors, doing door-to-door sales. They couldn't keep track of their activity, who they'd spoken to, who they'd sold to. It was really quite complicated for them to do that. So they had this kind of concept that they could do it better than, the products and software that was out there today. And that's really where Pipedrive was kind of born.
This was circa 2010, right?
Yeah, around 2010.
Around
so
2010.
it's about 14 years old. I joined Pipedrive about 2 years ago. And what I would say is probably for their first 100 million of ARR, that was really product-led growth. That was true PLG kind of motion. So, very much a very intuitive, easy product, which is still kind of our USPs today. But basically, it was really word of mouth, and it was kind of that viral kind of aspect of growth. And they grew the company to around 90,000 users across the world, got unicorn status. And then in 2020, they sold to Vista, the private equity company, for around a $1.5 billion valuation, which I think at the time was about 10x kind of multiple.
They sold the whole company?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So
I didn't know that.
So they sold it all. There was a couple of angel investors that are still on the board today. So Bessemer, as an example. But I joined about 2 years ago. And it was really kind of at that transitional stage where they were moving from PLG to sales assisted. And at the time, we had about 12 AEs. So the product is actually translated in 22 different languages across the world. But as I said, a lot of it was PLG motion. But as they built out functionality like workflow automations and a bit more around kind of the ecosystems and API and Zapier and Mate, it become a little bit more complex. So they needed this kind of sales assisted element to their motion.
Was that also, you're sort of also moving up market, I imagine, by adding those features?
Yeah, slightly. Yeah. We were definitely attracting more mid-market kind of prospects and now customers. We call them high-value customers at Pipedrive. So we have kind of a high-value motion. But we've really grown that team over the last 2 years. There was 12 AEs when I joined. There's now 30 AEs across the world. And we also have introduced a kind of SDR and BDR function, which also does a little bit more around kind of outbound and prospecting, which we didn't have as a motion when I joined. So it's really grown in headcount, but we're very clear on kind of our segmentation. I have a kind of view, Collin, and would love to get your thoughts on kind of go-to-market, where like your go-to-market, really, you really have to think about like that, right? You have to kind of think about like the company size, as you mentioned. Are you mid-market? Are you enterprise? Are you small business? Then you might think about geos. As I said, we're 22 different languages. So, how you might look after a customer in Brazil might be very different to how you look after a customer in the UK or the US. So you
a lot
have
of
to
cultural differences. I learned that at Aircall, which is a Paris-based company. And, the experience I had there, I was running sales in North America, but I was collaborating a lot with the team in Paris. And I would fly out there and visit them and jump on some, calls, listen. And it was a very different game, especially like certain countries, like selling into Germany. I remember the culture was just so different that when they answer the phone, like they want very clear answers. They want to know certain things. And it's like very different scripting, very different things that actually worked. So yeah, if you're selling into, what did you say? Across or I thought I wrote down, would you say like 20 different countries or something?
Yes. So we actually, interesting fact, we actually, I think we have a Pipedrive customer nearly in every country in the world.
Cool.
However, we're very, we're very centric about our kind of what we call our core geos. So our kind of core geos are the US and Canada or North America, EMEA, which is obviously Central Europe, and then we have rest of the world. And we do very well in some of the LATAM region, so Mexico, Brazil, are very strong regions for Pipedrive. But you're completely spot on. There's kind of nuances to cultural differences, very formal in Germany, for example, whereas in Brazil, they're actually very relaxed and like informal, and they want to chat about football or the weather. So it's a very kind of, when you're thinking about your go-to-market, you have to be very kind of understanding of those nuances as you build out the team, and that's certainly what we've done at Pipedrive, and certainly what I've done over the last 2 years as we've built that team out.
I love it. It's not easy to anyone who's listening to this right now from the States, who's only selling into the States. I just want to emphasize, in case you get to a point in your career where you're ready to go global or expand into different regions, it really is not easy. It really is not just rubber stamping the same process. I mean, you can try and sometimes it'll work, but what we realized pretty quickly is you really need people who speak the language, understand the culture, and in certain areas, they should even just be physically located there so that they really are a part of the culture. We ran into that quite a bit, but there's definitely areas where there's overlap and whatnot. Like EMEA, you can kind of get away with like, there's a lot of cross culture, in some of these areas, but like, we definitely ran into that. And it took specialized leadership for sure. And the biggest challenge, which I'm sure you run into, I don't know if you're bilingual or multilingual, but trying to coach salespeople when their calls are in another language, forget about it, right? You have to basically take their word for it. And if you've ever led sales teams and you ask them to tell you what went wrong on a call, that they often don't know, or they think they know but that they went wrong, so they don't know. So yeah, those things are tough. So kudos to you. It's not easy. But any tips there on how you've navigated that?
Well, I think you're spot on, right? You have to think about kind of, do you have the language capabilities? So from a kind of individual contributor to manager to be able to coach and develop on those calls. So you need to think about that. And then there's kind of also the ecosystem that surrounds it. So one of the things is every ecosystem is different. So there are different ERP systems or billing systems in Brazil versus Europe. There are different billing systems in the US versus Australia. So you have to really think about your kind of ecosystem, and are you set up for that? And then outside of that, my kind of other big takeaway is, even if you nail the sales piece, you have to think about all the services around it. So not only do you convert someone in France, in French, but then do you have the support in that local language? So do you have the CSM that can then converse in that local language? So when you're really thinking about expanding, as you said, if you're coming outside of the US, you really do have to think about all of the services that you provide that customer, not just can you sell your product to them. So yeah, I'm super aligned with you. But it's a super interesting challenge as well at the same time, Collin, because it makes it really kind of, you think you know how to sell, and then you go, oh, but that doesn't really work over here, and you're like, okay, why does that happen? So yeah, been a super journey for me around that. But definitely would think about kind of the services around your core product that you're selling.
Yeah, and the currencies, the taxes, you brought back some memories with the billing systems. Yeah, it's like so many things are just different, and they'll use buzzwords and language that you may not, even if they're speaking the same language. There's also just, I remember being on the first call where they kept referring to VAT, and I didn't know what a VAT was. It's tax to me, and we'll go through this whole call. I have no clue what they're saying because it's my first time even hearing someone say that. And it's these little details that, like, along the way, you really need salespeople that understand that stuff. Or as a leader, you might just be lost, right?
Yeah, and you really prompted a really interesting thing as you were talking around kind of currency and tax and different legislation in different regions. The other big learning for us is to leverage your partner network. You can't do everything on your own. And to build out a partner community in those geos, to your point, having people on the ground, speaking the local language, to go and deliver training sessions, maybe in person, to leverage, even if you don't have actual people within your organization situated in those kind of countries or geos. If you have a partner community that's really well aligned with your values and how you want to sell the product, you can really make amazing community leveraging them. Like Pipedrive, for example, we have kind of 3 different kind of partnerships. We have what we call alliances, which is kind of our tech ecosystem. So that would be your Aircalls, your PandaDocs. We have our kind of partner channel community, which is what we call our solution providers, Collin. So they do all of what I've just said: localization, implementations, integrations, do consultancy and training services. And then
we have like resellers.
Totally.
Oh, cool. I didn't know you guys do that. Cool.
Yeah. And that's where we leverage that kind of in-country kind of relationship to deliver things in certain ways. And then
is that kind like channel sales? They call that channel sales here?
Yeah. So we call channel sales. That's what we call it internally at Pipedrive as well. And then lastly is kind of what we call our affiliates, which are your kind of content creators, your influencers that also help obviously promote your kind of product and your story and messaging. So yeah, the only other thing I would add is leverage your partner network.
That's really smart. And I think you could probably build, if you're sort of just figuring this out and you're acquiring your first customers in new countries, you almost want to try to make some of them a hybrid partner, right? Like your first customer in a new country, if you can sort of make them, sort of an insider who's helping you along the way, whether it's with referrals or just teaching you about the market, little tips and tricks about the local, how things work. It's sort of like I forget what they call them. Are they beta customers? Not really, but or founding customers, I think some people call them, right? You can kind of
totally
a network like that. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Well, I want to understand, this is the big one for me that I'm super curious about. And I think I have a sense of it, but I really want to understand how you're thinking about it and what has worked and what hasn't. But in terms of positioning Pipedrive today against Salesforce, against HubSpot, I would imagine that the way you position yourself against them has evolved over the last 14 years. You've been there for the last 2. Can you give me a sense of when you came in, sort of how was it being positioned, and have you had to change that at all? Have you had to rethink that? I mean, HubSpot, for example, has grown a lot, right? Their brand has evolved a lot. They've moved up market. They've gone public, all this stuff. Obviously, Salesforce is a behemoth. How have you thought about that? Has that evolved? Has it gotten more complicated, less complicated? Anywhere you want to go with that. I imagine that was a big topic for you to dive into when you started.
Yeah, totally. I think firstly, I would just say that, different solutions like HubSpot and Salesforce are more suited depending on the customer use case. And I think for us, it was more around how do we really understand what the customer's trying to do? Like, what are the kind of problems and challenges that they're trying to do? And if you think about a CRM system like Pipedrive, what a customer's really trying to do is put their business into a platform. They're trying to take whatever they're using today, whether it's a spreadsheet, paper, pen, another CRM system, and say, okay, if I put this into your system, what does that look like? How does it work? How do they want it to work? What's important to them? And then can our solution do that? And I think when I joined Pipedrive, we took a very quick touch approach because we were a PLG kind of, first and foremost. And Collin, just to say today, nearly 45% of our customers are still PLG. So they still self-serve, they still are able to do it, and they're able to do it very easily. And that's part of our kind of USPs. Like, our user experience is very intuitive, it's easy to get going, and it's very much kind of a plug and play. You get value from the product very quickly.
So that was my perception, just to say. So you have nailed it on at least conveying that message through the branding and whatnot. I mean, I've known of Pipedrive forever, right? We were integrated in AirCall, so we sold to a lot of customers who were on Pipedrive. And my perception has been, I was mostly on Salesforce at every company I went to, and then I used HubSpot for a brief period of time at one company. But that was my perception. So you're nailing it on sort of at least helping people understand where you fit in the market. And the way I sort of describe this, and for those who are listening, or, you know, you might find out before or after you hear this episode, but I'm going to be working with you guys over the coming months. And, you know, I was trying to write a post and draft up how I will announce that. And I wrote it before I had this conversation because I wanted to see like how I would describe it and if it aligned with what you said. And it's very much how I described it, which is like, you know, Salesforce is like, you're going to go there when you have full-time sales engineers and, you know, you're ready to build out this big, robust infrastructure. HubSpot, you're probably going to go there when you can afford to hire an agency to set it up for you. And Pipedrive is like, we just want to set this thing up now ourselves. Is that almost like a good way of simplifying the complexity levels?
Collin, if you ever want to come and write a pitch for us, you are more than welcome to do so. No, absolutely spot on. And I think the other kind of differentiation is for us is that we were, as I explained to you earlier, we were very much focused on the sales element of it. So the way that the platform is built, it's very much, we talk about deals. You know, you might talk about opportunities in a kind of Salesforce environment. But for us, it's about how do we help a customer progress that deal through their pipeline so that they're actually, you know, closing that deal, winning that deal. And then off the back of that deal, at the heart of our platform is what we call activities, which is kind of this ability to follow up, right? See where your follow-ups are needed today, where your follow-ups are next week, next month, next quarter, and actually not missing that. You know, I explained that kind of process where they used to knock on the doors to do selling. They didn't know which doors they'd knocked on. They didn't know which door next to do. And at the heart of our platform, that is really what we solve. And if you think about kind of, you know, our kind of competitors, they solve other challenges and problems, maybe not as focused on kind of the deal management as we would be at Pipedrive.
Got it. So that's where, when you say it's like built by salespeople for salespeople, that's that element, right? Whereas like a Salesforce is really, it's sort of built for everyone. It's kind of built for finance. It's built for operations. It's kind of almost the salesperson comes last in many of those cases, right?
Yeah, totally. And if you take HubSpot, you know, HubSpot from a marketing automation kind of platform, a fantastic platform, right? Yeah. Like really, really nailed what they were trying to do. And obviously they've now moved as they, you know, past that 100 million mark. They've now moved into kind of Service Hub, Sales Hub and stuff like that. But we've stayed quite true to our core at the moment in terms of the deal management and sales aspect of it.
Cool. Do you find that companies outgrow Pipedrive, or is that kind of why you guys have added so many features over the years, is to sort of be able to let people grow into it? Is that not a problem today? Was it ever a problem? I'm curious.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a kind of like with any kind of software or technology, as you service a kind of, you know, ICP or certain profile, you know, there's going to be times where those customers now need to move on, right? The same way, I'm sure, you know, when you have a family, you start thinking about a 4x4, but if you live on your own, you're probably thinking about a sports car or something like that. So I think as you grow, as you said, and those kind of situations and what you need change, it will be time to evaluate whether that kind of platform and software allows you to do that. What we find, though, is that we are able to solve a lot of our kind of customers' growth challenges and pains through our ecosystem. So through our ecosystem, we have over 500 different kind of platforms that solve most of our kind of use cases that we see. So, you know, if you want to do marketing, you can integrate MailChimp, ActiveCampaign, all of those kind of marketing platforms directly into Pipedrive. If you're looking for kind of project management, Monday, Asana, you can plug all those in. So we've got kind of this platform that's really open from an API perspective that allows us to solve those kind of customer problems as they grow.
Boom. Makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about Outbound. I know you gave me a sort of a sense of a lot of the business is coming from PLG, which doesn't surprise me because, like we sort of just talked about there, when you go to Pipedrive's website, it's very simple, right? And if you sign up for a trial, you're in the product. Like, it's just there. It's ready to use. You just fill some deals out and like you're ready to rock and roll. So that doesn't surprise me that there's just that initial growth. Because I think if I were to go to Google as someone who knows nothing today and I'm like, I need a sales, system or whatever, you're probably going to find Pipedrive, HubSpot, Zoho, Salesforce, and you go to their websites. And yeah, I think it's pretty obvious within the first few minutes that you're going to be able to get set up fastest on Pipedrive. Right. And you're not going to need a bunch of help to do it. So that makes a lot of sense to me. You said you brought in some SDRs. Has that been straight up outbound, or by outbound, I mean cold outbound? Or are you using them mostly to reach out to people who maybe have already submitted information or they already started a free trial? And so we're calling out to them. In other words, how much pure cold outbound are they doing?
It's very small on pure outbound, but maybe I can give you some context to that. We have a lot of what we called earn and own data. So within any business, there's kind of, whether people have visited your website at some point, they've abandoned the basket, they've, watched some webinars and, logged onto some kind of podcasts, and you've captured that data. So we have a lot of that, and we have a lot on a monthly basis.
That's Collin, why I asked that way, because I figured you probably don't need to do a lot of pure cold outbound. Yeah.
Totally. So we have thousands of customers reading our blogs and gated content, for example, on a monthly basis. We have a contact sales button on our website that actually wasn't there when I came to Pipedrive. I introduced it. When 2 years ago, that PLG motion, you just signed up for a free trial, and if you liked the product, you bought it, right? Mm-hmm. That was the kind of journey. But actually, more and more, as you quite rightly said, as you move kind of more up market into mid market, people have questions before they want to even jump into a trial. Like, I don't want to waste my time, jumping into a trial, even if it's only 60 seconds. I just want to ask a couple of questions. Can you do X, Y, and Z? If you can, let me have a look at it. If we can't, let's just stop. Yeah. So I think we introduced some kind of pieces to our website that allow customers to leave their details. Then we would get back to them, answer their questions and things like that. So that's really where the SDRs came in.
And they did not do that before you arrived?
No, it was all.
So you couldn't even reach out to talk if you wanted to?
No.
So that's pure PLG. It's PLG or go away.
Correct. Yeah. And and as we've as you quite rightly said about Google and Meta and LinkedIn and YouTube, as we've driven more traffic to the website over the years, as you quite rightly said, not everyone wants to jump into a trial. So now we're capturing that traffic to say, hey, you got a question, you want to watch a demo, et cetera, you can leave your details, and then obviously the SDR will qualify those and take that customer on the best journey for them based on that data. Then we have expired trials. So we have lots of customers that start the trial, Collin. Yep. I'd love us to convert everyone, but lots of customers don't convert into paying customers. So again, we reach out to those customers. But on that, what I would say is there's kind of two elements to it, right? One element is you want that customer to become a customer, but only if they're the right fit for your platform. You don't want to drive them in and then, 3 months later they churn. That isn't really helping anyone. So you really want to make sure they're the right fit. And then the second aspect is really learning kind of the lost reason behind, well, why didn't you convert? Like, was it a product thing? Was it like you didn't see what you wanted to see? There was something, the price wasn't right, or whatever it might be. But we've gained so much insight from running those campaigns, not just on the customers that we're now bringing back into Pipedrive, but on kind of like what product features are lacking in our roadmap. How was that experience that didn't quite resonate with that customer? How do we change that? How do we A/B test it? All of those things have really helped us by introducing the SDRs and BDRs into Pipedrive.
Are you now converting a decent percentage of sales by having those SDRs? Like, is there an additional sort of cohort of business that's coming in because of that you've been able to prove out?
Yeah. So from a kind of the way that we sort of look at it and the way that I sort of look at it is kind of a return on investment. If you're paying, 60K for an SDR, 70K, 80K, whatever the case may be, then you want to probably at least 4x that return we're actually currently at about 5x. And what I mean by that is like for every dollar that we spend in kind of our SDR motion, we're getting $5 back. So that really is working for us.
That's really working, because 3-1 is like what people try to achieve. If you're at 5-1, that's very good.
It is, and I would just caveat that with, to your point, Colin, that this is very intent data. I think the key to Outbound, from my perspective, is understanding the customer's intent at that point, right? You're the right person, right messaging, but it's also got to be the right intent. Obviously, the data that we're contacting, they have high intent. So, they've either tried the product or, they've left their details. So I think when you think about Outbound, you have to think about the intent aspect. How do you know what the intent of that customer is? So you know where they are in the funnel to then nurture them and get them through your funnel. We have just started exploring with some cold outbound, but we're being very, very targeted. So there are some industries where we over-index in our kind of customer base, and we know their language. So we know how to set their Pipedrive instance up for them to get great value. We know what problems they face. So on kind of 4 or 5 industries at the moment, we're now starting doing some cold outreach. But we're doing it very personalized, using use cases, and we're very much thinking about the messaging rather than kind of a spray and pray approach of, let's just go after everything. We're not there.
I want to ask how you arrived to that. Was it that you brought in these SDRs? They're, doing such a good job at working sort of the intent leads that you already have in the system, and there's some extra time, so you're like, hey, now let's also do this? Or did you say, hey, we brought in these SDRs, they're doing this, we're going to bring in some other SDRs to also do? Was it, I imagine, more the former?
Yes, it was. Yeah. So I've done outbound previously, past experiences. And the thing that I've learned is that outbound is difficult, but outbound definitely has a place. But you have to make sure that they are targeting what I would call high value customers. So we don't target customers that would be a PLG motion, to your point, like, customers with maybe 2 or 3 employees. We're looking at, businesses that are 500 employees, 700 employees, where there is a good opportunity that as you nurture that lead, if they do decide Pipedrive is the right solution, the ACV is going to be valuable to you. And that's the key to outbound, is making sure that the ACV that you target and your ICP is really a lot higher than what you would see on your normal motions.
Yeah. A lot of this sounds very similar to our approach at Aircall. It was sort of a similar evaluation process. We want to test it out, and then they sort of come in knowing what features they need and don't need. And there was a lot of that. So sounds very similar there. Now, I hadn't realized but when I wrote these questions, that Pipedrive was already acquired by, what would you say it was called? Vista, right? By private equity?
Yes, it was. Yeah. Yeah.
So this question might be sort of a before and after, or actually, let me first ask: was it acquired before you started?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
It was acquired in 2020, and I joined in 2022. So yeah, it was.
So this was like a COVID acquisition.
This was just pre-COVID, yeah.
Oh, so it was before. So it wasn't like COVID happened and then they rushed into this.
I think no, you might be right. It might have been post-COVID. So I think COVID was 2020, wasn't it? Was it 2020?
It was around that. Yeah. I guess
it feels so long ago, but
I know. Yeah, I think it was 2020. I don't think it was 2019. It was 2020. And then private equity started acquiring all these businesses because people were losing customers and whatever, and they're just like, we got to take the offer. So yeah, private equity won big through COVID.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of people that would have probably, like, they also paid on the multiples, right? Like, it was probably top of the multiples at that point as well.
If you were early enough. Yeah.
Exactly.
If you were 2021 or 2022, maybe not, right?
Yeah, it was November 2020. So Vista have owned Pipedrive for just over 4 years now.
Is it public how much they sold for?
It is, yeah. I think it was 1.5 billion in terms of the valuation.
Wow.
So it was a fantastic story, a unicorn story from Estonia, really, really fabulous. And as I said, they grew to about 100 million really on this kind of PLG motion. So, really, really great story. But yeah, we've been private equity owned since 2020.
How many employees total at the time of acquisition, roughly?
I think it was about 700, and it's a little bit bigger today. It's about 800 employees, but two-thirds of those, Colin, are, as you would expect, are in the engineering and R&D and the product org. So a lot of it.
That's really cool. I would imagine that added to the value of the business, because a lot of these companies, you see them get acquired and it's like they're spending 80% of their money on sales and marketing. And then it's like, what are you buying at that point? It's like you're buying a product, but it's like there's not a lot of engineering resources, and like you're probably overselling and over marketing it. You guys are much the opposite, which I actually didn't expect or anticipate that at all. Is very engineering led and very product led growth. And so that's a highly valuable acquisition for them to buy, because they're getting all of that talent and they're less dependent on sales and marketing, which is where you burn all the money, right?
Totally. And I think that was also the kind of exciting opportunity, was that it had already built out a fantastic foundation, as you said, from a kind of product-led organization. And then if you could overlay kind of the marketing and sales element,
right,
with kind of some kind of control on the costs, you probably have a very good model. And it is a fantastic product, not just because I work for Pipedrive. I'm very lucky. It's an amazing product.
Cool. Well, I think we've kind of answered this question, but I want to ask it anyway. I was going to ask, is Pipedrive a growth at all costs company? And what I mean by that is, I don't know if you've heard this term getting thrown around, growth at all costs, or GAC. And what that basically means is, over the last 20 some odd years, the growth model has pretty much been for startups to raise a ton of money, hire aggressively, lots of salespeople and marketers, and really not care so much about that LTV to CAC ratio, right? Maybe they're going 1-to-1. Maybe they're even spending money or losing money to make bring in some new customers. And it was all about growth, right? They just wanted to show top line growth. They didn't really care how much money they were burning. I was going to ask if Pipedrive is following that model, but really it's a two-part question now, because you've already been acquired. So I guess the question is, was it following that model before? It sounds like not really. It sounds like they've been efficient, but that doesn't mean they've been bootstrapped. I mean, they've raised money, they've hired tons of people, but they were not really going super heavy on sales and marketing. They were going with PLG. So curious to get your take there. Do you think it was ever a growth at all cost company, or not really?
I think it was always to grow. I think we still today, we always have kind of a kind of baseline, Colin, where we want to grow by a minimum of 20% every year. That is just kind of a non-negotiable for us. And I think that's culturally been where Pipedrive has been at. But I think over the last couple of years, certainly during the pandemic, as you said, the growth at all costs has been reevaluated, because,
yes,
the kind of multiples haven't been the same as we've spoken about before. But kind of the way that most SaaS businesses, and I'm sure you've heard this terminology, but maybe for the audience, is we have a kind of rule of 40, which basically means it's a combination of your growth and your profitability, or your EBITDA. So you're kind of combining the two metrics to get over 40. So if your growth is 20% and your EBITDA is 20%, well done, you're at rule of 40. You're at that point, you're going to be the kind of model of the rule of 40 is that is sustainable from a kind of growth and a profitability perspective. Now, if your growth slightly slows, so let's say your growth isn't at 20%, let's say it's at 10%, then you've really got to make sure your profitability is at 30%. So that, again, the two combined equal 40. So we've held ourselves accountable to that over the last couple of years as a team, as a leadership team, and we've done that successfully. But as I said, the kind of minimum for us is always kind of 20% growth year on year from an ARR perspective, and we've been able to do that, which has been really good.
Got it. This makes sense. Okay, this is a good history lesson for me. I think now what I understand is Pipedrive was most likely a part of what I call really the initial cohort of SaaS companies that actually played a role in creating the need for growth at all costs. What I mean by that is they performed so well that it proved to the venture capital world that you need to hit these benchmarks so that we can mimic and mirror, what Pipedrive did, what HubSpot did, or whatever. And so the challenge for that, as a lot of people have learned, is like in the early days, there was a lot less competition. And so having a PLG product that's, a CRM, and you can just do, it's a whole different world today for SaaS companies that are starting companies. Today they come out and in 6 months. If they have a good product, they have 2 to 3 competitors already
Yeah.
jumping down their throat, and they raise $10 million, and you raise $10 million, and now they're raising 100 to one up you, and it becomes this game of just like who can hire more people and move faster and have the bigger, flashier brand. And it gets to a point, or at least it has really, to your point, COVID has triggered a sort of divergence back to sanity in this realm. But it was really just like who could spend more money and look bigger, right? Rather than actually even be bigger. But yeah, okay. So now I understand where Pipedrive fits into that. You guys are one of the early ones who created that by having your hyper growth, and you basically became a role model, right? That people wanted to then follow in those footsteps. So okay,
Yeah, I think and I'm sure it will be all circular. I think the kind of initial kind of VC model, as you quite rightly said, was just raise more money, hire more people, it'll grow. But I also think there was kind of this analogy that as long as you kept growing your customer base, at some point you'd be able to monetize them. I think that is slightly changed now, which is like, no, tell me how you're going to monetize the customer before we get into you've got 100,000 customers. So I think that's the kind of model now, which is like, look, we think you've got a great space, we think you're solving a real problem, but tell me from a monetization perspective, how does that monetization model work? And I think if you're not able to tell that story, I think that's then very difficult for VCs and PEs to get excited about.
Yeah, they're being skeptical. I know people don't like to hear this term, but I think a lot of our VC venture capital world over the past couple decades has turned into Ponzi schemes. And I think they've known that, and they just haven't cared. And basically what that meant is if they found a company who had, some good growth, they had a really energetic founder who could pitch it and sell it, as long as you created like a compelling story that we could then say this company's now worth more money, they were like, okay, because we're going to go raise the valuation, and they don't really care. But now, post COVID, money's expensive again, interest rates up, all this sort of stuff. It like forces them back to reality where it's like, okay, we can't just like tell people this is going to be great and raise the valuation. Like everyone's like, no, I want to know how it's going to be great or prove it now, right? Because no one wants to be stuck holding the bag in a Ponzi scheme. And that is ultimately what those things turn into. Is they keep getting acquired, or sorry, they raise new rounds, whatever. Eventually someone gets stuck holding that inflated company that maybe isn't really that valuable, right? And or maybe it is valuable, but it's just not worth the 15 billion valuation that they snake oil salesperson it up to, to their venture markets and whatnot. So I think there's just been a big reality check to that. But I also think as money gets cheap again, those guys are going to go right back. They're going to go right back to doing what they do best, which is pumping and dumping. It's basically what it is. But cool. So you guys have played a role in really being on the good end of that because you were a role model. You guys started it out early. Let's jump into AI. Are you guys, and maybe two questions here. I'm not sure if AI is being worked into Pipedrive, the product itself, but I'm curious more on the side of your sales process. Are you guys adopting AI into your process today? Or have you sort of taken a back seat and said, let's kind of see what plays out here? Are you automating any new stuff? Are you replacing SDRs, anything like that?
I think firstly, I'd say it's evolving at a pace that is really hard to kind of forecast where it will end up. I think, me and you, Collin, have been probably here far too long in this. You've been able to go, okay, with this new piece of technology, whether it's, conversational intelligence or whatever it might be, you sort of can see, okay, where that's going to end up or where that's going to lead to. I think with AI, the exciting thing, but also the kind of thing that is still unknown is it's evolving at such a pace that I think it's very hard to say where it will land and where it will end up. I guess my kind of view is that the way that we will interact with software and technology in the future will change. That's 100% what I believe. What I would say about kind of how we're using AI internally and in product is, firstly, we've started using AI to summarize our conversations. So I'm able to now, we use a product called Cloud Talk, very similar to Aircall, where there's hundreds and thousands of customer interactions, whether it be demos or telephone calls, that I'm now able to really get really good insight and actionable insight without having to spend hours reviewing demos or listening to calls. I
It's
still do,
amazing,
by the
isn't
way.
it?
I know, which is,
Yeah.
it's really, really is amazing.
You can
So
search a call by the keywords, like game
yeah.
changer. Yeah.
Or if I want to see how many of my competitors are in these kind of conversations, to your point,
Yeah.
I can say, okay, of the 1,000 calls, how many times did HubSpot come up? And we can sort of dive into that. So really, really great. And also now with AI and generative AI, you're getting kind of a sentiment of the customer. So you can see whether the customer's engaged in that call or not engaged. And, it's amazing. And I can now do that at scale and do that really quickly. And that means that our decision making is faster internally when we want to do different things around our process. So that's one kind of area that we're using AI in. The other area is, and I'm sure you've done this, and I'm sure many of the sales managers or sales leaders that listening to this podcast, you're forever forecasting, right? You're forever in forecasting. You're forever in big deal reviews, and you're asking the same questions all the time, right? So you're asking, have we got the economical buyer? What are the red flags? All of the kind of core stuff that we're taught as sales managers and sales leaders. We're now using AI to really do our big deal reviews like so quickly. Like I don't have to spend an hour now going through 10 different deals, finding out whether, what's the next step, what's the next action. I've got a whole summary now where we're using AI to summarize that and where the gaps are. I still think there's a human element to that. So we use the summary to speed up the conversation, but then the kind of questions that we're asking still require the kind of seller and the individual contributor to say, this is how I feel about the deal. This is where I need help. This is what's blocking the deal. There's still that element that we still rely on the kind of individual contributor. But that's how we're using AI internally. We are looking, Collin, at using AI for some of our outbound SDR stuff. But again, very use case specific. So we're looking at maybe languages we don't cover. We're looking at kind of things that don't really sit today in our core teams that we want to test. And
now, would that be giving your SDRs a tool so they can do that? Or do you mean sort of automating like a separate function?
Both.
Okay.
So one of the kind of use cases is looking at kind of a researcher. You spend a lot of time, right? Trawling LinkedIn, finding out information about the company, the person, to be able to use AI in that format to give all of that research directly to the SDR before they do their outreach. Absolutely golden and really great use case. We are going to test though on some just normal outreach with AI, using AI, but again, very selective in our use cases. And we're building it around our unique processes. What I find with a lot of the kind of software today is it's sort of, hey, I've built this, you get what you get. But every sales leader that I speak to has a unique process. Some want to do discovery. Some say discovery don't work. Some want to do this. So for me, it's more kind of how do you build that technology, in this case, generative AI or AI, specifically for your workflow, not an out of the box kind of spray and pray, but a kind of actually it's built for your process. So if you were onboarding this new SDR into your business and teaching them how you want them to run the process, the value proposition, the messaging, you have to build that very uniquely to your organization. And I think that's the key to leveraging AI in a way that you get the most out of it.
I love it. And I think that's the right move. I had a gentleman named Yuri, who is the CEO of AI SDR on
Great. Here. Yuri's a great guy, has a brilliant view on AI SDR. Yeah, I've had a couple of interactions with Yuri. Great guy. Love him.
Yeah, I mean, his take is pretty good. And I would just pass this advice along to you if you're going to test anything out. He said, use AI to repeat things that you've already figured out and perfected. Don't use it to figure new things out.
Yeah.
So use a human to figure out what works. And then when it's so repeatable, then you can maybe try to use the AI to automate it. So I think that's a very honest and good piece of advice, because, what he sees a lot of is companies that want to add an SDR team. They don't have one yet. And they reach out to him. They're like, we just want to add this. He's like, not such a good idea. Like, you need to figure it out with some humans first. Maybe someday, AI can just figure it out, but you really need someone to to blaze that trail. I got a couple more questions here, quick ones. I want to get a quick sense of how you think about quotas, how you set quotas, and if you're comfortable sharing sort of roughly what the quota attainment is at Pipedrive. Like, was that problematic before you joined, and did you have to do anything to change? Anything you want to share on that subject? And the reason I ask, just to tee it up, is the quota attainment in the industry is horrible. It's like under 40% on average. So if you're willing to share some secrets there and where you stand, that would be great.
Yeah, I think quota attainment is always dictated to normally by your ambitions as an organization. So if you're looking to grow by 20% and you're at 100 million, it's likely that your quota is going to be 120 million next year, right? So you need to think about that kind of aspect. So I think for us, it was more firstly going, okay, how much do we want to grow by? What is the kind of target for the year? So we do a kind of what we call annual operating plan, or an AOP as we call it. And basically we lay out, okay, what do we know about the history, i.e. how have we done this year? What are our growth ambitions for next year? And then that obviously spits out a number, right? And you'll have loads of initiatives underneath that, Collin, that hopefully are going to support you get into that number.
Can I pause you for 1 second, just because I'm curious? You're going through this process. I imagine the private equity company who bought you is quite involved, and if not orchestrating the process themselves. How do they look at in terms of, and I'm curious because you're so far through, I think, many of the phases of growth that I've worked through, where it was usually like, we need to, double, triple, right? And they sort of had the T2, D3. Are you guys past that phase where you're like looking at, well, we need to double, triple, and is it now like we look at how we did last year and we set a realistic forecast based on LY? Like, is that how they think about it? Or are they thinking about growth multiples? Like, well, we have to keep following this pattern. I don't know if that made sense the way I asked.
Yeah, no, it absolutely makes sense. So I guess it's a blend of both in terms of where we are at the moment. So Vista will have a very clear view on all of their portfolio companies and how much they want to grow by next year. So there's some kind of a steer that comes top down, right? Like everything else, that says we want to grow by a minimum of 25% on our new business next year. And that will then sort of form our kind of plans and go, okay, how do we get to that number? Where are we today? What's the gap? What are the initiatives that we believe we need to close those gaps? And then that sort of forms the quota. So in answer to your question, we get a blend of both, which is, okay, historically, what has happened this year? And then what are our kind of growth ambitions for next year? And as I said, our kind of baseline, Collin, is a minimum of 20%. Like if we went back to Vista and said, okay, our new business next year will be 15% growth, they'd be like, no way, like our minimum is 20%. On the reverse,
it's also a healthy number, right? Like they're not telling you to go triple the business every year.
No.
Yeah,
no. And I think kind of, when we think about how we want to grow as an organization, over the next 3 years, we've got kind of a CAGR of 30%, right? So we want to grow by 30% in terms of our business today. So there's kind of to your point, when you get to kind of, we've got 110,000 customers across the world now using Pipedrive. When you get to that stage, you are going to kind of slow in terms of, to your point, that kind of double, triple, double kind of scenario. But yeah, we tend to have a kind of minimum growth percentage on our new business, and that flows down to kind of quotas and then how we set those individual targets. In terms of your question, we have around about 65% of our reps hitting quota attainment, which we would like to get it to around about 70%, because in my experience, Collin, if you're getting it to 70%, you're getting a good balance of the target stretching enough where not everyone's hitting it, but you've got a good portion of the team being able to show that that is achievable and obviously that they're earning comp from it. So for us, it's kind of making sure that we get that balance of, okay, are we delivering on the company objectives? Do the quotas all align? What I would say from my perspective is sometimes there's organizations that want to over quota, right? So you have this 25, you have this 25% kind of growth target. You then say, okay, well, the quotas need to be 10% above the 25%. And then that sort of gives you that buffer between what happens when it becomes more challenging in times like now is you get those stats of 40%. And what happens then is people move, people leave because they just can't see a way to earn the comp that they have in their mind. And that becomes a very difficult scenario because everything in my experience across the last 20 years, your most tenured reps are your best performing ones.
Yes.
They always are.
Yes.
And every time you recruit someone new, it costs you money, time, you take a risk. You know, you don't always, you know, you're not always going to get that hire right. Hopefully you've got enough experience to get more right than wrong. But what you will find is every time you lose someone that's worked for you plus 3 years, you are losing a lot of quota at that point.
Yes.
And you probably need 2 to 3 people to just even make up that one individual contributor. So
yes,
you really need to think about when you're going into a macro environment is really working with your stakeholders. I'm very fortunate to have, you know, a really great set of C-suite from CEO, COO, and CFO that understand the importance of setting quotas at a realistic target that allows people to go and achieve those quotas.
Music to my ears. You hit the nail on the head on so much there. I mean, the concept of, you know, adding buffers to quotas, it's greed is where it comes from. And it's a lack of understanding the human psychology of the actual role, right? There's an enormous advantage to being on a winning team, right? And we're seeing it happen politically in this country now. All of the sudden, a bunch of people want to flock to the other side because they want to be a part of the winning team, right? And so it's the same thing in sales. It's the same thing in sports. When you feel like you're winning, you will perform better. And so I have always opted on the side of I'd rather have our quotas be too low and create a culture of crushing those quotas, because the advantage of people having this positive mindset of being on a winning team, not only do they're not so stressed, and so they're going to put forward their better work, they're going to be in better moods, but they're also not going to be worried about leaving. They're not thinking about, am I going to get fired or do I need to look for another job, which is so distracting and it eats up so much time and you don't see it. You can't measure it, but you know it's happening. And so for that reason, I've always opted toward, you know, trying to have quotas on the lower end. And I've actually, in my episode with Kevin Dorsey, we dove in deep to this topic where we had both done some experiments back in the day I did at Aircall, where we had this situation of we needed to hit this new target and we were scheduled to hire some more people to do it. And as I was sitting there coming up with my spreadsheet, you know, for my quarterly presentation to the team, I would call it a quarterly roundtable, where I would come in and present the new goals, the updates, give away some awards and all sorts of stuff. And I basically just threw out the entire spreadsheet the morning of, because I said, there's something about this just doesn't feel right. I'm not going to do it. And I went in and just talked to the team and I said, I just threw away my whole presentation because I don't feel confident in it. And instead, I'm going to tell you all the sort of debate that I'm having in my head, and I'm going to let you decide. And the debate is, here's how much revenue we need to do next year. I just put it up on the board, on the screen. And I said, here was our plan to get there, is that we were going to hire this many more people and quotas were going to go to this, and this is how we were going to do it. And I said, something about this just doesn't feel right in my gut. Something tells me we're going to end up with a bunch of people missing quota. And so what I will ask everyone in this room is, would you prefer that we keep the team small and I go fight against finance and HR and tell them we're not going to make these hires and we're not going to raise quota, but I have everyone's commitment on this team that we're going to do everything in our power to hit 120% of our quotas. And the reason that they're going to be willing to do that is because they know by not making these hires, they get more pipeline, they get more management attention, and they don't have to worry about having more competition on the team. And I let them make that decision. We ended up beating quota by 140%. So we didn't just hit the 20% that we need. We went over and above it, and everyone earned a ton of money. And finance was happy because our overhead costs were way under where they were supposed to be. and it all worked out. And, I shared that story with Kevin, and he had almost the exact same story to share, from Patient Pop, where he's ran, or I think it was Patient Pop, where he ran some tests like that. And so, if you have the right players on the team and they're committed and they really want to be there, you can get them rallied around this concept of like, hey guys, if you hit 100% of your goal, you're not getting fired. You're keeping your job. You did great. But let's all just push to do farther. And instead of bringing in more people, or instead of jacking the quotas up, we can make this happen as a team. And when you get people involved in those decisions, they own it. Whereas if I had gone in there with my PowerPoint presentation and just dictated to them how it was all going to go, I don't think we would have done nearly as well that quarter as we ended up doing. So I think that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, no, I think we've all probably got stories that are very similar to that, and I can totally resonate. I think there's a balance, isn't there, of like, as you grow, like making sure that you're optimizing conversion, you're optimizing the ACV of every deal, whilst making sure that you have enough. So I think there's kind of, when I came to Pipedrive, because we were this PLG motion, very small sales team, Colin, they had a flood of, like, they had 900 like opportunities every month coming into them, which was far too many to be able to really actually nurture all of those leads and get the maximum conversion out of them. So I'm totally with you. I think the idea, though, just to add more heads to get better results is not the right way to approach it. It might be, like in our case over the last 2 years, it has been like, we've got really great results and we've grown the team, but it was out of understanding the data, analyzing the data, understanding the kind of funnel, all the conversion metrics, and then adding in the team members sensibly. And what it sounds like when you had that kind of moment of that kind of quarterly roundtable, it sounds like you had that moment where you're going, now is not the right time to add heads in.
Yeah.
And the right thing to do is this. And then maybe when you crushed it by 140% and air-cooled become bigger, maybe then the kind of conversation is slightly different, right? So I think for everyone listening, I think it's a great learning what you've just shared. And then to your point, as they grow through their maturity of the team, they should evaluate it at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's the same thing with putting buffers on quotas, all that sort of stuff. It sounds like you are following the sort of framework that I've been preaching a lot, which is scale demand before headcount, right? Hire people to meet the demand that you have rather than to try to fabricate the demand.
I worked for Sage, which is the accountancy software company, and I don't know if you know it, but they do an accounting product. It's a competitor to Intuit, basically, and they're huge. Like they're a UK based company, but they have Sage Intact in the US. They're a global organization.
Do they call them Sagents?
I don't think they do.
Oh,
no.
I thought I heard you say that. I thought they call their people Sagents instead of agents. That would have been funny.
No, maybe I should share that with them actually. But I worked for them for 2 years. Amazing company, great company. But the reason why I'm saying about Sage is that Sage had kind of this kind of on-prem kind of moving kind of to cloud, and so they had this whole kind of transformational aspect. And they wanted to maintain growth, and they were already doing $2 billion as an organization. And the way that they really did that was they really thought about their quotas and attainment, as you just explained. They weren't just, we want to do, 10% growth year on year, and here's your targets. They really thought about kind of what was achievable, how could they stretch those people. And, looking forward now, and I left 2017-ish, over the last 5 years, they've gone from strength to strength. And that's mainly through just having a very clear understanding of how they're going to set quotas and grow the company.
Yeah, it's so often overlooked. And I think it's because most sales leaders are not the best financially or operationally in spreadsheets, thinking strategically. They want to just usually go out there and help close deals and pump up the team and, help coach them and stuff. And it tends to be boring getting into these conversations with the finance team when you have to sit down and go through it all. And it's often kind of complex and you don't totally understand it. And I think that makes sales leaders sometimes be a little timid. They don't want to necessarily push back because they don't feel like they really know what they're talking about. And they don't, some of these finance people will just make you feel like you're kind of stupid. And then you just walk out of there feeling all small with your tail tucked between your legs and stuff. But like, yeah, you really do need to understand this stuff and not be afraid to push back, because oftentimes they think they're smarter, but it's just because they're looking at a spreadsheet. They're not thinking about the human element. They're not thinking about what actually happens mentally to a salesperson when they see the whole team is below quota. Well, now their performance isn't as good because they're mentally beating themselves down. And so now you're paying a premium for a lesser quality, right? It's like buying a Ferrari and putting cheap gas in it. Like, why would you want to do that? If you're going to hire the Ferrari, like, put the premium gas in it, pump them up, get them to feel like they're winning, like set them up for success. And all of a sudden, like the compounding effect is tremendous. I'm going to throw one last one at you here, and you can go in any direction you want with this. But what is your best advice for salespeople selling into a crowded market? What advice would you leave them with if they're up against a lot of competition, similar to Pipedrive? I imagine you guys are frequently in conversations of explaining how you're different. What do you think's a high-level best advice for people in those situations?
This is going to sound like a really corny answer, Colin, so I apologize, because just start with the customer. Like, really just start with really understanding what is it the customer cares about. Mm-hmm. They don't care about your product, your solution. What do they really care about in their business? And once you get to the heart of what they really care about and why they're looking to do something or even consider doing something, right? Because most of the time deals are lost because people just don't take any action. It isn't because they've chosen someone else, even though we'd like to believe that, or your salesperson says it's because of price or we didn't have this feature.
Yeah.
It's normally because there's not enough conviction into doing something because it requires time and effort. So I think if, as a kind of seller in a crowded space, if you can really understand what your customer cares about and the kind of problems and the objectives that they're trying to move and kind of what they care about in 12 months' time, and you can really demonstrate how you can have an impact on that outcome better than some of your kind of competitors, that's when you avoid that kind of crowded noise. Because, there's a one thing that's always really helped me is lots of businesses today will make a decision based on ROI. They'll base, okay, how much does it cost me? What's the value I get back?
And it's a BS formula anyway.
Correct, yeah. But the value I get back is, it could be time, it could be money, it could be whatever. To your point, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're able to demonstrate the outcome that they care about, not what you care about, not what your product's doing, not what product marketing have told you, what the customer cares about, then that's how I would think about selling. And that's what we talk about with our ICs is, how do you really understand what the customer cares about? And then how do you connect the dots to what they care about to your product? That would be my advice.
You just you gave me a flashback to one of the first lessons I learned in my first sales job. We were about 4 days into training, and I'll leave us on this note because it's a perfect touch on what you just said. The way that my VP of sales taught me that lesson is there were 16 of us in the room. We were all in new hire training, and we were about halfway through the week of training, or almost all the way through. I think we were at like Thursday. It was like the second to last day of our entry level training. And the company name was Single Platform. And so what he did is he went around the room and he said, Collin, what's the best part about Single Platform? And I would be like, well, it's this feature and this, that, and that. And then he would go, Sarah, what's the best part about Single Platform? She'd be like, well, it's the price. It's this. And well, what's the best part? And everyone would pitch off something else. And then he would go, you're all wrong. And he would turn to the next slide and it would say, whatever the customer says it is.
Yeah.
That's the best part. And he goes, you will only find that out by asking them and listening to them. And they may be signing up for the product for something that you never even noticed as a piece of value. And that is all that matters. And that's basically what you just explained. So I love it.
Cool.
Awesome, Sean. Anything you want to promote right now? Are you hiring for anyone? Are you looking for any specific talent that you want to shout out here?
Yeah, so we are expanding our account management team. So we have a new business team, but we also have an account management team. So we're actually hiring, I think we have like 9 open roles that we're going to hire for over the next kind of 3 months, Colin, between now and the end of Q1. But yeah, if there's any amazing account managers, we'd love to hear from you.
Where's the location? Are they remote?
So that it would be remote. So we're looking for 5 people in the US and 4 people in EMEA, which actually will be based in Lisbon, but they can work remotely. But yeah, would love to hear from any account managers that want to learn more.
When you say account manager, are they in sales, or this is like CSM type role?
So this would be in sales, but it would be managing a portfolio of customers that are already paying customers, but it would also be managing new paying customers as they come through their onboarding journey.
Oh, so you're keeping the full cycle of the customer under the sales umbrella.
At a certain MRR, yeah. So if customers at a certain MRR, they go to a customer success manager. If they're under it, they will stay in the sales environment.
Got it. I like that. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, and that's all your jobs are listed on pipedrive.com?
They are all listed on pipedrive.com.
Awesome. Well, everyone, if you're looking for a job or you know someone who's looking, check it out, pipedrive.com, and you can follow Sean. I will post your Twitter and everything below in the notes, but thanks so much for joining me.
No worries. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Likewise.